Welcome back to another episode of Surviving the Side Hustle. I'm super excited today because we've got Scott Maderer on, and we were just chatting a little while ago. So I'm excited to kind of dive into his story, his secrets to high performance, and maybe some of the things that he's overcome over the years. He's a pretty interesting dude, so I'm excited to dive in. I know there's a lot to cover, but Scott, man, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, thanks for those kind of behind the scenes. We just recorded an episode. Rob's coming on my show. That'll be out later, a little while later. And I really had a great time interviewing him and learning more about him and his journey and where he's been as well. So thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. Well, I'd love to just kind of dive in now because I know you do a lot of different things. You seems like you're wearing a lot of different hats. What would you say is like the number one thing that you're doing, or what gets your most attention? I guess I should say.
Yeah, the badge kind of that I wear, or the identity I wear, is that of being a stewardship coach. So what that means is I help other Christian men and couples. A lot of them are small business owners, and I help them master their time, their talent, and their treasure so that they can live out their calling. That looks different for a lot of different people, but it usually comes down to if they're saying either I don't have enough time to do what I'm supposed to do, or I don't have enough money to do what I'm supposed to do. I feel like there's been something put on my heart, and this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what I'm made for, but I can't get there. That's kind of the folks that I help with and try to get them over that hump towards doing that thing. Because I truly believe if more people were doing what they were called to do, it'd be a much better world. Of course, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I do a lot of church work, I do a lot of nonprofit work. I used to be a teacher, I worked in the corporate world. So I've done, a million different things over the years, but at least in this current iteration, I consider myself a stewardship coach.
Hmm. And so, what does it look like working with you? Because you it sounds like you have a lot of experience doing a lot of different things. Things do you just lean on a lot your experience to teach and kind of guide individuals, or is there something else that you kind of have behind the way? Like, what does it look like working with you?
So I truly take on a coaching hat, and so I'll define that. So the difference between a coach and a consultant, at least in my definition, is a consultant is you have a specific problem, they have a specific solution, and they come in and apply that solution to your problem. By the way, that's not a value judgment. That's not saying that's bad. I mean, if you want to learn how to if you want to have somebody do Facebook ads for you, don't hire a coach, hire a consultant. Hire someone that knows how to do Facebook ads. That's what they implement. Where a coach, it's more about helping you deal with those deeper questions of, what am I supposed to be doing? What are my values? What are my priorities? I know you subscribe to the same thing I do, which is that all coaching fundamentally at some point is life coaching, because I work with finance, I work with time. Guess what? Both of those things interfere and interface with how do you live your life. So it really is still life coaching. It's just kind of what lens do you look at it through. Health coaching, still life coaching, career coaching. I still think that's life coaching. All of it is at some level because we're people. And so as a coach, part of my job is less to come in with the solution and more to come in with the questions that help you uncover the solution. Now, sometimes, because like you said, I've got a breadth of experience, sometimes I can implement a tool or a technique or a particular thing. So I also consider myself kind of like a mechanic where somebody brings the car in and they're like, hey, it's making a funny noise. And the mechanic's job is to figure out, do I hit something with a hammer or do I use a wrench? How do I diagnose this? And then what's the right tool to put into place to help someone overcome it? And so it is about awareness first. I call that the refocus stage. And then we begin to gain control. And that's where tools and techniques and other things come into place. And that allows us to set a plan. And I think the mistake a lot of times we make is we set the plan before we've done the work of refocusing and gaining control. And then it all falls apart on us and it frustrates us and we fail and we feel, oh, I must be not meant to do this. And we get all of those self-identity negative feelings and it stops our momentum instead of increasing our momentum. So the broad outline that I take when I work with anybody as a coach is refocus, gain control, and then set a plan.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. But I'm interested to hear, how did you land here? Because it sounded like you were doing a bunch of different things, a couple different careers, and how did you land on this stewardship coaching?
By accident. I think that's how a lot of us find things that we do. Looking backwards, I can connect dots, but at the time, those dots weren't there, if that makes sense. I think we'd always tell our story in reverse, right? We tell it about what has happened, but if I go back to living through it, I wouldn't have told you this is where I was going to end up. So I started I actually ran my first business when I was 12. I started a business by accident when I was 12 years old painting, because basically I figured out that it was really hot to paint in South Texas. So I hired all my friends to actually do the painting, and I just went and got the jobs and, pocketed the difference because I paid my friends cheaper than I was getting paid. So yeah, don't tell them that. They'll probably hunt me down and ask for money back. But that kind of thing. And then I started working in that. And then I became a school teacher. And what was interesting is, as a teacher, what jazzed me and what energized me wasn't the content. I mean, I taught science. I love science. I enjoyed teaching the kids content, but it was really the times that you were interacting with them about, what are they going to be when they grow up, and what are they, what kind of questions are they asking about life and about identity and all of those things. And then later, when I went into the corporate world, still in education, I moved from teaching to testing. My students said I did join the dark side because, I started writing tests for a living. But even there, I worked myself up to an executive position, and my interacting with the team and the people around me and developing leaders. And that's how I kept getting promoted, is basically I developed people until they could replace me, and then they'd be like, oh, well, we got to promote you because we don't need you anymore, you've replaced yourself. And it's like, okay. And I get a promotion, and then I'd replace myself again. And they'd be like, okay, promote you. So I kind of kept growing up the ladder by just sort of building the next layer of leaders. And that was what jazzed me. I mean, don't get me wrong, I liked parts of the other work, but the part that really fed me was that. And then what happened is, my wife and I, at the same time that I was transitioning from teacher to the corporate world, my wife and I went through a financial journey and financial problem of our own, where we had about 60 something thousand dollars in debt. At the time I was teaching, I made like $40,000 a year. We were not seeing a way out of it. I wasn't talking to my wife. I was going to protect her from all of this. I was actually suicidal because of finances. That's actually the number one cause of male suicide. I didn't feel like a good provider. I didn't feel like a good husband. I felt like, if I was out of the picture, that insurance would pay out and that would take care of my wife. By the way, none of this is true, but that's how I was feeling at the time. We were probably pretty close to divorce. And then what happened is some messaging changed. I began to hear some new information. And honestly, it made me angry. It was, people talking about living debt free and changing their life and all. I just got mad, and I'm like, nobody can do this. And then I realized all of a sudden that instead of being depressed and suicidal, I was kind of like angry. And it was like, wait a minute, this is the first thing I've heard that got my emotions to shift. So I went and opened up to my wife and came clean, and we kind of decided we were going to radically change the way we were living. We ended up paying off $78,856.42
Wow.
in 2 years, 11 months. And you'll notice, by the way, that I know it to the penny. And you'll also notice it's bigger than the number I said a minute ago. And the reason why is, in the middle of that journey, I actually had emergency surgery. I was in the hospital twice, once in December and once in January. So I got to pay everything twice,
Yeah.
because that's how insurance works. And doing all of that. So we ended up actually having more debt than we started with, but we still paid it off in 2 years, 11 months. I'm not allowed to round that to 3 years. My wife will come out of the wall and hit me, because it's 2 years, 11 months. But all of that was by just radically changing the way we were living, the way we were communicating, everything about what we were doing. And what happened is, people started looking at us and going, y'all are weird. Do you think you could help us be weird? And so it kind of started first as this financial thing. And we started working with people in church and in other settings and doing all of this teaching and beginning to interact with folks. And then I learned more about, hey, we're not really always making an impact. So I started studying coaching, and I started studying finances and how to work with people and how to actually help people get motivated to change, which was interesting because it was the same skills I used as a teacher and I used in the corporate world, but I didn't realize it at first. And I began to kind of translate those into coaching. And so very quickly, the coaching started growing. And I realized, wait a minute, what I'm doing around money also applies to time. And it also applies to how we think about ourselves and our identity and how we communicate and how we relate to others. This is all tied into one big bow. And as a Christian, the stewardship is time, talent, and treasures. So I started calling it stewardship and just kind of added onto the coaching and added onto the coaching. And then I kind of reversed my climb up the corporate ladder. I literally gave them over a year's notice and said, I'm quitting, trained my own replacement, replaced myself, worked back down to a part-time position, and then took the coaching business full time back in 2017. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Wow, yeah, so that's crazy how you were talking about building people up to replace you, and I feel like a lot of people are afraid of doing that. I know a couple of people who they're in situations where their superior or somebody is not like setting themselves up and kind of sabotaging
Yep.
their own teammates because they don't want them to get better and replace them. And like, can you talk a little bit on like how that mindset is and like, yeah.
I'm a firm believer in the idea that as a leader, our job isn't to be the person with all the answers. It's to be the person that brings the right people together and asks the right questions. And again, you'll notice that's that coaching philosophy showing up again. So I was never threatened by not being the person that had all the answers, by not being the person that was the master at everything. It was okay with me if I didn't know everything, because here's the thing: I went into it with the idea of, okay, great, I want to learn, teach me. And what was interesting is I kept getting better at things, and eventually I was kind of the person that knew enough about a lot of different things that a lot of times I'd get called to a meeting to kind of be like the translator. So like the business unit was talking to the operations unit, and then the finance people in the room, and they talked three different languages. And I was the one that had gone in and worked hard to learn enough about each of them that I could kind of listen to what the finance people were saying and then turn to the operations people and go, okay, so what they're saying is, and translate it into operations language and do the same thing with the business unit. And what was interesting is that made me valuable, but not just because of quote my position, if that made sense. I created value that was more than just the position I held. And so that allowed me to look at my position and go, I could replace my position. I can teach somebody to do what my quote day-to-day job is. And if they replace me, it's not like they're going to get rid of me, because I have other value outside of just the positional value. And I think that's what real leadership is it's recognizing that your value as a leader doesn't have to do with the position or the title or the corner office or any of that sort of stuff. It has to do with how you build up others and create a team, because at the end of the day, that's the route to move from just being successful to actually having significance in the
Mhm.
place and in the impact that you have. You can be successful on your own. I don't think you can really get significance without involving others.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I feel like that's really important to keep that in mind. And you were saying that you had mentioned a couple of times just recently here. You just said that you're listening to these different departments and how they're communicating and how they communicate different from the other departments. And I
Mhm.
feel like that's so true, even just with people from person to person. There's so many different kinds of communication styles. And as I continue to grow and evolve as a coach and as a mentor and workshop facilitator, that's a big thing that we kind of teach too is helping each other to kind of identify different communication styles and connecting and really influencing people in an ethical way so that
Mhm.
people continue to grow and get better. And I know you had mentioned it just a little bit earlier with in terms of coaching and getting people to change behaviors or change different things and influencing them in a positive manner. Can you talk a little bit on how that communication is important, whether it's with yourself and your internal thoughts or your spouse or even your team and other people even?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I actually use is called DISC, the DISC framework. In fact, you can probably see it on the shelf behind me. There's a dial back there that's a DISC framework. And the reason I use DISC isn't because it's the best framework. It's not because it's the only framework. It's simply because it's simple enough that I could teach it quickly and I can use it in real time. I can listen to people and kind of begin to understand where they're coming from, and then I can actually apply that. And so I'm a practical person. I want something I can practically use in the real world, and this fills that bowl, at least for me. And it's this idea of the basic framework is two criteria that are kind of either or. So most people are either more outgoing or more reserved, and that, to be careful to define that, outgoing here doesn't mean extrovert introvert. Instead, outgoing has to do with kind of how your motor runs. So how your internal energy is. So an outgoing person is somebody who's going to talk quickly. They're going to move their hands. They're going to get going. And they're the kind of person that gets up in the morning. They go, 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 and then they collapse at the end of the day. Sorry. Excuse me. Where a reserved person, the other end of the spectrum, a reserved person is somebody who's a little calmer, a little quieter. They make decisions a little slower. They move through the day a little more deliberately. And notice neither one of these is good or bad. They're just different ways people are wired. Then on the other frameworks of reserved and outgoing, is the top is outgoing and the bottom is reserved. If you think about an axis and you do the other framework, on one side is task oriented people, and on the other is people oriented people. So a task oriented person is somebody who, when you give them something to do, they think about how to get it done. They tend to be interested in results. They tend to be thinking about the steps or the process or the technique or the how behind it. Where a people oriented person tends to think about the who behind it. Who do I need to involve to get this done? Who is going to be engaged in this activity? Are people going to be taken care of? Is there fairness? Is there justice? These sorts of things. And again, not a value judgment. Not one of these is good and the other's bad. They're just how people are wired. So if you think about that and you go, up and down is one and left and right is the other. So just out of curiosity for you, would you consider yourself more outgoing or more reserved most of the time?
Yeah, I would say that I'm more outgoing most of the time just because of coaching and events and things like
Okay.
that.
So you tend to be a little bit more high energy, a little bit more driven, a little bit more talk fast and make quick decisions and kind of that kind of thing. On the people and task oriented, do you kind of think through things in terms of the process and the task, or do you think through things in terms of the who do I need to involve in this kind of side of things?
Yeah, again, I feel like I kind of fluctuate, but I would say more so on the task side of things.
Okay. And that's important what you just said about you kind of fluctuate. Because first off, I just divided people into kind of four quadrants, and you put yourself in the upper left one, outgoing and the task oriented. If you had to pick another, so if you weren't outgoing in task, would you say you're more outgoing people or would you say you're more reserved task?
Probably more reserved task.
Okay. So you're kind of going up and down on this left hand side. You're staying on the task oriented side, but you can switch between outgoing and reserved. Okay.
Mhm.
By the way, that's exactly how I'm wired. And so that in disc, that upper left hand quadrant, outgoing and task, is what we call a D. D stands for dominant, driver, outgoing. It's about 10% of the population. These are the, you know, lead, follow, get out of the way kind of people. They make decisions quickly. They're very interested in results. They're motivated by results. They think about, getting things done. That's kind of their key language. On the other side, if we go outgoing and people, that's an I. I stands for inspirational. Inspirational folks tend to be a lot of fun. They tend to be a lot of high energy. These are the folks that, like at a conference, if they say on stage, we need a volunteer, before they can finish the word volunteer, the eyes are like have their hands up or occasionally are already on stage. Okay. Depending on how much of an eye they are. They're always like to be the center of activity, okay, and fun and energy. Then we go down the side. So now we're going to go to reserved and we're going to go to people oriented reserve. So those are the S's. S stands for steady. It stands for supporter. These are the folks, they're the nicest people on the planet. By the way, this is also the most common type of people on the planet. S's tend to be very interested in stability, status quo. They don't like conflict. They like things to be calm. They tend to be very interested in fairness and rightness and justice. And then going to the other side is going to be reserved and task oriented, which you identified as kind of your second biggest area. Those are the C's. That's cautious. So you'll notice it spells DISC. The C, or the cautious type, these are folks that are interested in getting things right. So it's not just getting it done, it's getting it done perfectly. They tend to ask a lot of questions. They tend to be the folks that need a lot of steps and process. If I give them a list and it's numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, they're going to start with number 1. They're going to end with number 4. Even if I told them they don't have to do them in order, doesn't matter. They're going to do them in order because they follow the rules in a way. They follow the process in a way. And so these are kind of the 4 types. And as you pointed out, usually we're not purely one of these. We're a blend of several. Sometimes all 4 at some level, we're a blend. But you can think of them more as sort of your native tongue. If you're naturally wired to be like a DC, like you kind of identified, or a CD, kind of on that left-hand side, it takes more energy for you to work across into the people component. So thinking about things like fairness, it's not that you can't do it. It's just that's not going to be your initial thought. You have to put it on your list and go, oh, I should probably think about how this is going to affect everybody, and actually think that through, or maybe involve some other people on my team who kind of have that natural bent, because that's just not going to be my natural way of framing things. And even more, once you understand yourself, you can understand the other person. So now I know I'm a DC, but I'm talking to my wife, who's a high S. I can talk all day long about results and process. She doesn't care. Okay. She wants to know how everyone's going to be taken care of. If I don't put that in, she's like at the end of the conversation going, I haven't heard anything that's important to me. Why do I care? It's learning. And again, you can do that in a workplace. You can do that in a relationship. You can do that. So first learn yourself, but then recognize that you then have the burden of learning other people and then translating yourself to be able to speak their language. Here's the cool thing about that. Now all of a sudden your team actually cares because you do. Okay. It's a little extra work. By the way, I turned some of the people stuff into a task. So like when I was a leader, I literally had on Wednesday, I had a block of time that popped up on my calendar. It would list 3 names. And my job during that hour was to go visit those 3 people, stop at their cubicle. I carried a notebook. I took notes in it. Okay. These people knew that they were an event on my calendar. These were my S's on my team. I would show up and it'd be like, how was the baseball game last week? Because you mentioned last week that your kid had a baseball game. I wrote it down. How'd they do? Did they win? Yeah, they won. They're going to state. Awesome. That's cool. I knew their kids' names. I knew their birthdays. I knew all of that because that was important to them. By the way, they knew I was writing this stuff down. They knew it was an event on my calendar. They didn't care. They looked forward to their Wednesday because they knew that I was going. By the way, they also knew it didn't come naturally to me. They knew I was turning this into something that I could do because I cared about them. You want to talk about a team that'll like pull out the water guns and, let's go. We'll put the fire out. We don't care, because they knew I cared. And by the way, you'll notice I said I visited my S's. I'm not going to go visit my D's, my C's, or my I's. Here's why. My D's just want to be left alone. They just want to be told, what do they need to get done? And then leave them the heck alone and they'll go do it. Okay. My C's, I had already called into the office and explained the process to them in detail, given them a chance to ask questions, checked in with them to make sure they didn't have any new questions after they got started. But I'm interacting with them around the process, not around the people. My I's, I didn't have to go visit them because they came into my office. Okay. Yeah. They just showed up. I had to teach them when the door is closed, unless it's an emergency, don't come in. When the door is open, come in and visit all you want. Okay. You can interrupt me. I don't care. And they would. And I didn't care. And I would interact with them. And they learned and they fed off of that. So it was learning the way the different people on my team communicated to be able to speak to them in the right language. And again, this same thing applies whether it's in your relationship, it applies with your kids, it applies all of those different ways. And there's a lot more you can go into, but that's a simple framework that most of us can learn pretty quickly and start looking for and applying almost immediately.
Yeah, and I think that was beautifully said and explained. So thank you for sharing that. And I can't remember where I heard it, but somewhere along the line, someone had shared with me that good leaders are good at communicating and sharing their message and telling everybody what they need to be told, or sharing what they need to say, I guess I should say.
Mhm.
But great leaders or even better leaders share the message so that the audience can hear it. So you
Mhm.
change the way that you talk and you explain it to them in their tongue or their communication or their style. And I believe that. And I think that's so true. And I think you're right on the head, or hit the nail right on the head with that on where I am, because I feel like I'm very achievement driven, and I'm trying to get things done, very big on the process. Anytime girlfriend wants to chat with me, I'm usually just jumping straight into problem solving mode. And sometimes she's just like, I just want to talk. I don't want
Right.
to solve any problems. So that makes total sense.
Learn or teach her to tell you, or you learn to ask the question, are you looking for a solution or do you just need me to listen? Okay. My wife will literally come to me and go, I don't want a solution, just want you to listen. It's like, okay,
I
because now I
love
know
that.
the rules, right? I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm just supposed to listen. Okay, I can do that. But it is, and by the way, this isn't a gender thing either. People think, oh, that's a gender thing. Men solve problems and women, bring the problems and want to listen. There is some gender to it, but not completely. It actually isn't just gender that determines that. There is actually something deeper than that. And so, even guys, how they approach, quote, communicating around a problem is different if they're wired different. And so it isn't a guy thing one way, girl thing the other way, but it is a be aware of it and learn to ask the question rather than make the assumption, because we assume that people are communicating to us and want what we want.
Yeah.
Truth is they don't.
No.
you know but and then when you're talking to an audience, it becomes even more complicated, because now you have to think about the fact that you've got all of those different things in the audience. And so how do I craft a speech or communicate to a group of people and make sure I'm hitting all of their needs?
Oh yeah.
And that becomes even more complicated.
Yeah, that's so important. I teach a couple public speaking workshops and classes, and a lot of times people come in and they're just excited and they just want to go out and share their thing. And I'm always telling them like, hey, when you do get a talk or you do book something with somebody, make sure you ask them as many questions as you can about the audience so that you can tailor your talk to them so it
Yep.
lands a lot better. And I think you said it perfectly there on being able to connect and communicate the message, whatever it may be, so that it actually lands instead of just kind of going over the head.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, yeah, I love this. This is excellent conversation, and it definitely transfers over. And again, big thing for me is the awareness aspect. Understanding, you
Absolutely.
said it perfectly, understanding yourself, and then you can start to understand others better, and that makes it so much easier to connect and create change. And whether you're working with somebody individually or even in sales, copy, or marketing, and for small businesses, it's great because you got to know your audience, you got to know who's buying your product, whatever it may be, and figure and putting yourself in their shoes too, so you can
Mhm.
see it through their perspective.
And getting deeper than just the demographics. I mean, I think so often as business owners, coaches do this, others do this. We approach things from a demographic standpoint. So I'm a coach and I work with, entrepreneurial men between the ages of 32 and, 45 who make this much money and they da 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 da. Those are all demographic factors. They're facts. They're check boxes. Instead, if we start thinking about the psychographics, so, what are they worried about? What are they hopeful for? What do they dream of? What are they afraid of? What are they thinking and feeling? And the truth is, it's weird, but if you focus it on the psychographics, you can narrow things down and yet be broader, which sounds counterintuitive, but it's because when you describe the feeling part of it, people connect with it better.
Oh,
And so now all of a sudden, your people don't even know why they're attracted to your message, but they are, because people will say things like, man, that just spoke to me. Oh, have you been reading my mail? Are you like spying on me? They'll ask you questions like that because it's like, you actually understand where I'm coming from. You understand the feeling that I have of, take finances, of all the money comes in, all the money goes out. I know I make good money. I have no idea where it's going. I don't understand why I can't have anything to show for it. That frustration, that's the frustration that they're really looking for a solution for.
Yeah, that's very, very true. So Scott, I'd love to kind of bring the conversation back over to your coaching specifically. We kind of mentioned a little bit on what it's like working with you, but so the individuals that you do work with, how do they find you? Are they, where are they in their life or in their headset? So going back to the psychographic, what are they thinking? How do they know that they need your help?
More often than not, it's one of two problems, right? That gets them started thinking on this. It's that feeling of, I know there's something I'm supposed to be doing. I know I'm supposed to be doing more of, and sometimes that more is a business. Sometimes that more is just like, I'm supposed to go to my daughter's soccer game and I keep having to skip it. I haven't gotten to a single soccer game this year. And that's important to me because family is important to me. And yet I'm not able to do it. And then the thing that's holding them back is either time or money. So it's I'm too busy doing stuff to do the stuff that matters, or it's, I don't have the money. And now here's the interesting thing about not having the money. It's not necessarily I don't have it as much as it is it's not going where I want it to go. A lot of the folks that I work with are very high income earners, but all the money comes in, all the money goes out, and they don't really have any feeling of control. They don't know where it's going. It's constantly kind of playing whack-a-mole, just running from emergency to emergency, paying Peter to pay Paul, to moving money around, never really knowing where it's coming from. They have a business, but they're constantly taking from the business to solve problems at home, and then they move money back out of home to solve problems at the business. And it's this kind of disorganized, chaotic feeling. So it's not lack of money as much as it is lack of control. And that again comes back to, think about it. That's the same thing with time, right? What's happening? I'm too busy. Why? Well, because I'm lacking control. I don't feel like I can say yes to the right things or no to the right things. And everything just kind of shows up on my calendar and I just run through the day 24/7. And all of them start in the same place, which is stepping back into that, we're back to that refocus, gain control, set a plan, because more often than not, it's that first step of actually looking at what you're doing, being intentional about it, being inspired about it, and doing that, which by the way is the hardest work, and thinking truly hard about, where does this start? What do I have to say no to? What do I have to say yes to, so that I can say yes to the stuff that's most important and say no to the stuff that actually doesn't matter anyway? Because usually what happens is people think it's about saying no. They think it's about lack. They think it's about budgeting. The reason budgeting has a bad term is everybody's like, I can't budget. It just tells me what I can't do. It's like, no, it doesn't. It tells you what you can do, because you get to pick what goes in the budget. So if it's not important to you, don't put it in the budget, And if it is important to you, put it in the budget. It's the old thing of, you can tell me all day long what's important to you, but if you really want me to know, show me your calendar and your checkbook, or your calendar and your online bank statement. Because if I see where you're spending your time and where you're spending your money, that's what's really important to you. And when it's out of alignment, that's when you're frustrated. And then that's my job as a coach, is to help you say, okay, now how do we bring that into alignment so that that frustration can go away?
Wow. Yeah, that's very clear. That's helpful. Man, I wish I knew where you were like 10 years ago when I was grinding and working these crazy hours and I'm like, oh, I can't do this, can't do that. That would have been a huge help. But so Scott, so it sounds like you've got a lot going on there. What else you've got on the plate for this year? Like what can we look forward to seeing you doing, or what kind of projects are you excited about?
I'm actually working on an app right now that is part of the system that I use around time. I've already got some around money, so I'm kind of trying to add that in. I recently published a book called Inspired Living that's on the shelf behind me back there, the blue one. So I'm continuing to go out and kind of promote that, and I'm working and looking for speaking opportunities around that book as well. So I'm kind of trying to add in more speaking. I used to live out in the middle of nowhere, so going to speaking opportunities and that sort of thing was hard, where now I'm kind of more central and in a bigger community. So I'm kind of gearing up that part of my business again. And then, of course, continuing to coach. I've worked with, over 1,000 clients in 20 countries, 38 states. I keep looking for new countries because I want that 20 to grow, but it's fun to work with the individuals and see the light bulb go off. So continuing to do that as well.
Love that. And I want to be courteous of your time because I know you're busy, you've got a lot of things going on. But how do people get in contact with you and how do they find you if you are taking on new clients? It sounds like
Sure.
are handling a lot of
Absolutely.
people.
So I put together a landing page just for your listeners. So if you go to my website, which is inspiredstewardship.com, and then just put in /side hustle, then what you'll find there is I put together a landing page. It's got information, some free resources around time, talent, and treasures. So if you're just looking for a kickstart, there's a way you can sign up. You'll get it delivered in your inbox. There's information about my book, my podcast. So if you want to subscribe and listen to Rob Coming on Mine, that's there as well as some information about how you can set up a time and chat with me. So if anything I've said sounds like something that would help you, again, you can find all of that over at inspiredstewardship.com/side hustle.
Boom, there you go. So make sure you guys head over to that website, check out the free content resources, and make sure you subscribe to his show as well. And check out our episode once mine airs with him over there. So Scott, I really appreciate you coming on, sharing, having a great conversation. I love diving into all the communication stuff and the coaching and all that stuff. It really amps me up. So it was really great. And hearing a bit about your story too, some of the things you've gone through and different challenges and such. It's been really awesome to connect with you and get a little bit deeper. So thank you for coming on. Before I let you go, though, I got to ask you if you were to throw out everything, bring it all together. So all the different experiences, the different industries you've worked in, the different mentors and people you've walked and talked with in conversations and such, and you were to boil it all down into one piece of advice for somebody out there who's just starting their entrepreneurial world, their side hustle has just kicked off, and they're looking to be successful and grow to the next level, what would be your advice to them?
I think it's intentional. And that's the one word answer. And what I mean by that is, I think too often we do things by accident. I mean, I even said that earlier about my own coaching business. How did you become a stewardship coach? By accident. And that's kind of true and that's kind of not. It's about being intentional in that framework of constantly when you do things, looking at what you do, executing on that plan, and then review, reflect, revise, repeat, right? Plan, execute, review, reflect, revise, repeat. Because instead of looking for those chances to just hit it out of the park and bat a million and, triple, take a triple and all of those things, look for those chances to do small incremental improvement intentionally. And you'd be amazed at how much growth you can do and how quickly it can happen when you stop looking for that, home run moment and just start looking at that constant, slow, steady pressure and growth.
Wow, I love it. Thank you for sharing that. That is powerful and very and need to be reminded. Embrace the grind and push through and get going with it. And I just love it, dude. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to share again with the audience. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Until next time, guys. Peace, peace, peace.